Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Arbour, and this is my presentation for the Literature Review, Developing Land Use Policy to Mitigate Farmland Loss in North Carolina. Okay, so to get this presentation started, I will introduce the literature review topic, which is developing land use policy to mitigate farmland loss in North Carolina. So North Carolina is losing farmland at a staggering rate. We are rated second in the nation behind Texas for our rate of farmland that is being converted for development. So according to the American Farmland Trust, North Carolina is projected to lose over 1 million acres of farmland to development by the year 2040. This is using a projection model with our current land development patterns. So they have three projections. One best case scenario with better built cities, which would leave us losing about 600,000 acres by the year 2040. Then you have runaway sprawl, which is closer to 1.7 million acres of farmland lost by that time. This is, of course, a growing issue because North Carolina is a growing state. So by 2040, we are projected to grow, our population is projected to grow by 17%. So that's going to create more development and growth pressure here. So next we'll review why farmland preservation matters in planning. So number one, it maintains our prime agricultural land. So agricultural land is essentially a renewable resource. That is, once it's developed, it's never going to be undeveloped and used again for agricultural purposes. So once we lose that land, it's gone, and we can. There's things that planners can and should do in order to ease that. Secondly, it supports local economies. So in a state like North Carolina, agricultural goods are big export of ours. It really is important for our overall economy as well as our local economies. Thirdly, and most importantly, it does protect our food supply. So it's pretty important to preserve our agricultural land. So next, I'll introduce my research question, which is how can successful farmland loss mitigation methods developed throughout the United States be implemented in North Carolina with respect to the state's limits on local government authority? And here is a quick overview of the research for farmland loss mitigation and methods. So I began the research process by reading about the projected farmland loss as a national problem from the National Land Trust with a focus on North Carolina. Next, I began to explore the mitigation methods used by local governments across the United States and North Carolina. How effective are the current programs, and what could make these programs more successful? And through reading all of it, it sounds as though land use policies um, can make almost every single one of these programs more successful. So I started to narrow down the research back to land use policies to learn about how other local governments are responding to the threat of farmland loss. So because North Carolina is a Dillon rural state, local governments are creatures of the state, and they only have the authority which is expressly granted to them by the North Carolina General Statutes. So good news, the North Carolina General Statutes, they do mandate that counties have to have a present use value program, and other, these are helpful programs that, that help to encourage farmers to keep farming. So we have agricultural protection, which is mandated on one hand, but on the other hand, um, developing land use policy which could help mitigate this farmland loss and ease some of these growth pressures is not always permitted. And a very relevant example would be Senate Bill 382, which was introduced at the end of December last year. So next I'll discuss one of the themes for this literature review. So this is a purchase of agricultural easements in North Carolina voluntary agricultural districts. So these are two agricultural land preservation programs here in North Carolina. So North Carolina is among 28 states which have adopted the purchase of agricultural easement programs. Conservation easements are a voluntary legal agreement which permanently restrict use of the land for agricultural and forestry practices. Voluntary agricultural districts work a little bit differently. The participants are operating a bona fide farm. They've agreed to a conservation easement which prohibits non-farming development of the property for a period of 10 years. And there are a few benefits for the farmer in exchange for volunteering. So while the purchase of agricultural easements and the voluntary agricultural districts programs are amongst the most robust farmland preservation programs here in North Carolina, they do come with their own set of challenges. One is that holding the conservation easement carries benefits for the county. However, it does require extra staff and resources. Secondly, there's the funding issue. So most of these for the purchase of agricultural easements, they typically receive funding through very competitive grants. So then if they're able to obtain the grant, they still have to face the escalating real estate prices. So this is especially true in growing areas in North Carolina around Wilmington, the Triangle, and Mecklenburg County. Next, these programs are often partially funded by the local governments who administer it. So when political will changes over time through elections, funding and support with these programs can dry up or be reduced. And lastly, these are programs which farmers must willingly participate in. They're voluntary. So if a farmer's not interested in participating, then you can't force them to do it. So that's another limitation. So the next theme for my literature review is transfer of development rights. Of course, transfer of development rights or purchase of development rights are both tools that are popular in the United States for farmland protections. So many local governments across the country, use TDRs and PDRs to preserve farmland by offering to purchase or transfer the rights to develop the farmland for willing farm owners. So the farmland is then only permitted to be used for agricultural purposes, and the right to develop that land is elsewhere. So the transfer of development rights and the purchase of development rights program may be a viable option for governments that are struggling to preserve farmland here in North Carolina. However, there is a steep cost associated with TDR and PDR programs, which would be a barrier for many or any local governments. Additionally, many success stories from local governments adopted such policy can be attributed to state contributions of funds of the program, which is something that I've read through my research here. So a lot of these programs are receiving state funds, and the ones that are not just really don't have the funds to make a meaningful impact. The next theme for my literature review is urban growth boundaries. So urban growth boundaries are used to protect agricultural land in environmentally sensitive areas. Urban growth boundaries have become a popular tool and a planner's tool belt in cities across the United States for preserving environment. So they work by preventing intrusive urban growth into undeveloped areas, which prevents farmland segmentation, which of course occurs when the land that they're producing on becomes segmented by other uses. This results in higher operating costs for the farmer, which may be prevented by the urban growth boundaries. They do offer a buffer between farmland and residential uses. And the good news is that they are not new to North Carolina. So large urbanized areas in North Carolina, such as the city of Durham, has implemented urban growth boundaries in recent years and uses it as a mechanism of preserving farmland in rural areas. Establishing new urban growth boundaries in North Carolina may not be possible right now with the new Senate Bill 382, as it may qualify as may fit into the new definition of down zoning, which of course is reducing the uses or densities within a certain zoning district. So next I'll speak about the findings for North Carolina Chapter 160D and Senate Bill 382. So again, North Carolina is a Dillon rule state. So local governments may only exercise powers which are expressly given to them by the state. So North Carolina local governments are granted the authority to enforce development regulations by Chapter 160D and the North Carolina general statutes. With the recent passing of Senate Bill 382, which expands the definition of downzoning, local governments will be limited to how they can preserve agricultural land with land use policy, if not already adopted. I did include an example of this on the left-hand side of the slide, the agricultural protection areas. I actually took this from our draft land use plan that we are working on for the county I work in, Harnett County. So before the passing of Senate Bill 382, this was going to be an underlying land use was agricultural protection areas. This was going to be in areas of the county with no water, with no sewer, or doesn't really make sense to have very large lot sizes anyways, but it was going to sort of work to take away some of the incentives for developing there, and the focus is on protecting these agricultural areas. This is also an area in areas of the county where we have a many productive farms. However, this this idea was born before Senate Bill 382 was passed, and so now it's looking less likely that, unless the bill is repealed, that this will be able to take place. So that being said, so far through my research, it does appear that transfer development rights would seem like the most likely way to be able to mitigate farmland loss in North Carolina through land use policy, and the best way to supplement the programs that already exist here for agricultural land use preservation. And concludes my presentation. Thank you all so much for watching.